5 Live Formula One.
Sao Paulo always offers up something special, a place where comebacks have been mounted, champions have been crowned, and in 2023, Interlagos plays host to the final sprint weekend of the year. So, the first and only practice session coming up for you shortly, and then we'll get straight into qualifying later this evening, which will set the grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Then Saturday becomes its standalone event with the sprint shootout before the sprint race, and then we get Sunday's Grand Prix as normal. Guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin, and I am pleased to say joining me in the commentary box is the W Series race winner, a vice champion in the W Series, Alice Paulo. Is that a thing, vice champion? I can say that, right?
I guess so.
Yeah?
I mean, it doesn't sound as good as champion, but that's my own fault, isn't it?
Multiple W Series race winner.
Can't blame anybody else, can we?
W Series multiple race winner Alice Paulo joins me, as does the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. Brazil's always a fun one, Alice, though, isn't it? It's a little bit grey up in the sky. Chance of rain for this session, 20%, and it's supposed to increase as the day goes on. So qualifying later on might be affected. But how do you feel about Brazil?
Do you know what? As a kid, it was my favourite to drive around on the PlayStation game, PlayStation 1, probably F1 1998, a little bit of a throwback there. Same with Montreal, and actually this probably tops Montreal. I just love it. It's just an iconic circuit with so much history, but just as a driver's circuit, there's a nice variety of corners. You've got some medium speed, we've got a few high speed corners as well, and it's just a track with character, and of course that you can make moves, you can overtake. There's unpredictability with the weather as well, and I think it's certainly a driver's favourite, and it's obviously a place I'd love to have the opportunity to go around one day.
It would be certainly special, isn't it? One of the shortest on the calendar is this Interlagos track, 4.3 kilometres, just over 2.6 miles. And it has a bit of everything. It'll be the 50th race in Brazil for Formula One, the 40th at this track. And Andrew, you must have had a few jaunts to Interlagos over the years. Any fond memories?
I love Brazil. It has a race with bite. There's no question about that. It's a city with an edge and drama about it. You drive up the hill past a favela to get to the track, and some pretty shady things have happened on that road in the past.
As long as they've not happened to you.
Not to me, fortunately. Jensen Button's got a few stories I can tell you about that, being held up at gunpoint. The track itself is so atmospheric. It's a cauldron. You can hear the fans cheering already. It's a cauldron of intensity and drama. The racing is usually the same. It's got to be experienced to be believed.
It certainly has to. Well, you can hear the fans who are absolutely ready for this one. Just a few moments to go until the green light comes on at the end of the pit lane, and we'll get free practice one underway. Bring you up to speed, though, with how the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship is looking. Of course, it has already been sealed in the Drivers' and Constructors'. Max Verstappen currently has a 251-point gap over his teammate Sergio Perez, who is in second. And that's the battle we're really watching now towards the end of this season. Sergio Perez with 240 points, just 20 ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who lies in third. Carlos Sainz is now up into fourth, with Fernando Alonso falling down to fifth, with Aston Martin going backwards in the back end of this season. Over in the Constructors, and Red Bull have clinched the title, 731 points to their name as it currently stands, but Mercedes are currently second, 371 points to their name. Ferrari, McLaren and Aston Martin round out the top five. And actually, Andrew, on Mercedes, been some big news coming into this weekend, all to do with their chief technical officer, Mike Elliott, who has decided to leave the team, in Mercedes' words.
Yes, so it's been an interesting year at Mercedes design-wise. People might remember that back in April, it was announced that Mike Elliott, who became technical director in July 2021, in preparation for the 2022 regulations, was moving out of that role to become chief technical officer, and James Allison, who'd been technical director before and been promoted to chief technical officer, was coming back to be technical director. Now, at the time, Mercedes presented that as Elliott's idea, he thought that he'd sat down and looked at the lessons of the last 18 months where they've basically got the car design wrong twice, and decided that he wasn't best suited for the technical director role, and James Allison was. I don't think anybody in the paddock really believed that official line. It is true that Elliott's contract was running out, and he has decided to leave. How much encouragement he got in that decision is not clear at this stage, but it's definitely the case that Mercedes made a bad mistake over last winter in deciding to stick with this car philosophy that they introduced in 2022, the so-called zero side pod philosophy. It's been a tough few years for Mike Elliott, and he says he's going to take some time away from Formula One before he decides what to do next.
Well, a tough couple of years for him and the team with that design concept, as you say. But overall, since Mercedes entered the hybrid era, what achievements Mike Elliott and that team have had. So we wish him well for the future. Cars out on track then. And for those who wish to do a sync-up, it's 58 minutes and 53, 52, 51, 50 seconds remain of free practice one, and they were all lined up and ready to go at the end of the pit lane. Max Verstappen in the Red Bull was first out, and actually as they were all lined up on the pit lane exit, Alice, you can't help but think back to Mexico qualifying, where there was a lot of impeding going on, and that really ruffled a lot of feathers, blocking the fast lane, essentially, multiple drivers as they were trying to come out of the pit lane exit. But the FIA have moved on that already, and they've essentially banned that from happening. Here's Ocon first.
There is a screw on my front tire. It's not upside down, but it's sideways.
We're just going to have to hope that comes off. We'll keep an eye on everything.
So Esteban Ocon, they're reporting of a screw on his front tyre. So we'll keep that monitored, and I'm sure Alpine are as well. But yeah, so the FIA, Alice, have moved to stop drivers from blocking the pit lane exit, essentially.
And that's the correct thing. As the young drivers that come up through the junior categories, you're actually told you cannot stop in the fast lane. That's the thing. If you need to pull over into the slow lane. And actually, when you look at the categories like F3 and F2, they can't go down and queue at the end of the pit lane. They have. That's why you see some crazy, shots. If anyone that has tuned into those categories, they come out of the pit lane as soon as the light goes green. They're all filtered out into the pit lane. I do think sometimes that's a little bit dangerous. But if they do it in those categories, which are essentially the feeders into Formula One, this is where a lot of these drivers that we see on this grid have come from, then, why in Formula One should they be allowed to queue in the pit lane and stop people from getting laps? Sort yourself out when you get out on the track. I mean, there's Mexico, for example, there is enough room to sort yourself out, and that's part and parcel of the game.
Formula One's actually got itself into a bit of a pickle over this issue all year. The reason they were queuing at the end of the pit lane was because the FIA imposed a minimum lap time for the outlaps, or prep laps as they're more commonly called. The outlap drivers now have to use to get their tyres in the right temperature window for the qualifying lap. And because they've imposed a minimum lap time, and the drivers often don't want to be going fast on the outlaps because they don't want the tyres to overheat on the qualifying lap, so they're going as slow as possible, they're not able to then make a gap on the outlap. So then the only place left to make the gap is in the pit lane. And that's what happened in Singapore, where Max Verstappen was the first person to introduce this problem by blocking a load of people. People thought he should have been penalised at the time. He wasn't. They talked about it and they decided they would let it carry on for a while. Now they've changed their minds again. And they've come up with this new solution this weekend where you're not allowed to stop in the fast lane, but if you want to make a gap, you can do it between the pit exit lights and the safety car 2 line, which is about halfway down the back straight between turns 3 and 4. So we'll have to see how that develops. But it all stems from this issue of tyre preparation and qualifying lap time preparation.
It certainly does, and that being made clear in the race director's notes pre this event, Niels Wittich, outlining what we've just discussed, and if they are to do that, they've got to pull over as far to the left as possible. But of course, 12 months ago at this very track, Mercedes were back on form with George Russell taking the win and he's currently out on track at the moment. Let's hear from Verstappen, though, who's
I
fastest.
think my seat is flexing. It's not installed correctly, but we can fix that after the run.
Max, we are aware of that. It's not a reliability concern. You're safe to stay out.
So Verstappen's seat is flexing. I mean, that must be quite unnerving, uncomfortable for a driver, because essentially when you're in the cockpit, it's got to be moulded to you, right?
Yeah, those seats are moulded to them, so they will go and do a seat fit. They'll do numerous seat fits throughout the year if body shape can change, but then it slots into the tub basically in the car, and pretty much every driver on that grid will want to be strapped in as tightly as possible so they can feel every single movement of the car. And if your seat's moving about, you can't quite feel those movements as you want to. You're like, well, is that the car moving? Is it my seat moving? So Max is obviously saying that this seat's just not installed correctly. In a calm, Max fashion, he wasn't getting too uppity, but we are only 6 minutes into the weekend. George Russell is saying traction feels very poor, so he's down in 7th place at the moment, 1.7 seconds off the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, but having that seat sat in there nicely is what the driver wants.
Yeah, well, Russell just crossing the line, as you say, in 7th. Verstappen clearly not fazed by his seat flexing. He is fastest with a 1:13.1. Everybody out there on the hard compounded tyres. Verstappen fastest, then Leclerc. Oh, actually, Sergio Perez has just slot up into 2nd place off the back of a, let's face it, tough Mexico for Sergio Perez. Lap 1, turn 1. You can't win a Grand Prix, but you can certainly lose a Grand Prix there, and that is unfortunately what happened to Sergio Perez. How vital, Alice, are these next few races for Perez to cling on to that Red Bull seat?
We were talking about Perez, weren't we, before?
I know you've got some strong views.
We came on air and talking about that incident down at turn 1, and I said, let's say that was a Formula 2 race or a Formula 3 race or any other junior category. You would say, oh, that's just, you know, they're inexperienced, they've made a mistake, they've got it wrong, they've had the adrenaline, and every driver, doesn't matter if they're in F1, they'll have that adrenaline running down into turn 1. But that from Perez was a bit, from my point of view, a bit too desperate. You know, there was plenty of room for him on the left-hand side. He just turned in way too early, pinched Leclerc on the inside. He had nowhere to go. Okay, some people say, yeah, he had room to move over right. Okay, a wheel's width. That would have made not a blind bit of difference at all. So I just think, after a driver, you said how many races he competed now in Formula 1?
Well, he's 10th on the all-time list, is Perez. 254 Grand Prix starts.
That's a lot, and I think he's just under so much pressure that he's making these kind of mistakes, but we're seeing it time and time again. Lewis, did the same thing in Qatar, but, you know, that was just silly, really, from Perez.
It was a weird justification for it too. He said if he'd been on the podium at the end of the race, he would have always regretted not going for the lead at the first corner. Well, his teammate was on the inside, and he was only alongside him on the outside with another car in between them. How did he ever think he was going to get into the lead? And even if he did get into the lead, what made him think he was going to beat Max Verstappen? He hasn't beaten him since Baku in April. You know, it was just crazy. And, you know, Alice is absolutely right. It was a pressure mistake, and it was an odd justification for it afterwards. And he knows what, you know, it's all very well for Christian Horner, the team principal, to be saying, oh, it's our intention to have Perez in the seat next year. He's under contract. You know, saying it's our intention, that tells you everything you need to know. That means it is not decided yet. And if he can't fuck his ideas up, their concern basically at Red Bull is that if it's closer next year, you know, Verstappen's won the Constructors' Championship on his own for Red Bull this year. They didn't even need Perez, didn't even need a second car to win the Constructors' Championship. Their concern is if it's closer next year, if Mercedes and Ferrari get their act together and start challenging them, Hamilton and Russell, or Leclerc and Sainz is a driver lineup that Verstappen and Perez on Perez's form this year can't deal with. Now, the opposition might split points in terms of the Drivers' Championship, but it'd be a massive problem for Red Bull in the Constructors, and the Constructors is what pays the money. So that's what Red Bull are thinking about. And, it was very bad timing. And I don't think it was a coincidence that Perez made that mistake, having been out-qualified the day before by Daniel Ricciardo in an Alpha Tauri. And Ricciardo's the guy who, if they're going to drop Perez, it's probably going to be him, let's face it, who's going to get that seat.
So is that you putting pay to all of the rumours this week that were swirling around a certain Fernando Alonso, which is he's just come and put his Aston Martin in third before coming into the pits?
Yeah, I was almost going to talk about the time, actually, but Alonso kind of put pay to those rumours himself yesterday, didn't he? Actually, what's interesting about that is that there's a story on the BBC Sport website, by the way, if you've been living under a rock and haven't seen that, by the way, members of the audience, but which I suspect you probably have if you're listening to this online. But anyway, if you just read the words, it's what we would call in journalism a non-denial denial. He doesn't actually say it's not true. But it was very clear from the way he was talking yesterday. He was very unhappy about how that story, how those rumours had come about how people had been addressing them. And he, made a point of saying that, the journalists in the room, it hadn't been an experienced journalist in Formula 1, basically. It wasn't their responsibility, but he said there would be consequences for whoever he thought was responsible for it. Now, he didn't say what those consequences were or who they would be directed towards. But as I say, those words from Alonso and the manner in which he delivered them made it very clear how he felt about it.
Well, Alonso denying and not denying his manoeuvres for next year. He does have a contract with Aston Martin, and so does Sergio Perez with a contract for Red Bull. It's Verstappen still fastest. Perez, though, just 200ths back. Then Hamilton. Russell was just starting to fourth. Alonso fifth. Bottas, Leclerc, Norris, Ocon and Hülkenberg the top 10.
Going back to those Alonso rumours, wouldn't it be so cool to see those two lining up on the grid next year, Verstappen and Alonso? I mean, I don't know whether that's just as good as Verstappen and Hamilton lining up alongside each other, because we know how fiery Alonso can get, and he's still got speed at his age. How old is he now? He's quite an old guy. Maybe not as old as Benny, but he's getting that way.
Fernando Alonso is 41, isn't he?
He's 42.
Oh, when did he turn 42? In July. Yes, in July.
Yeah.
Well, it would be to sign with a Red Bull 42 going on 43. That would be something, wouldn't it? Hey, I'd be here for it if it happened. There were some cheers that you heard in the background. They were for Lewis Hamilton, the honorary Brazilian citizen who crossed the line with the third fastest time. And there was a little moment not too long ago coming up through the uphill left-hander turn 12 Junsao for Carlos Sainz in his Ferrari. The rear just stepping out on him. Logan Sargent in the Williams running out wide through turn 4 and over the curbs and onto the runoff area. And Oscar Piastri also reporting that his right wing mirror was broken. So Piastri still out there on track, but reporting that. Actually, Sargent just running off wide there is something to note, because of course we're on the back of Austin, the last sprint race, where Hamilton and Leclerc were both disqualified post-race.
I thought you were going to start talking about track limits then.
No, I'm going to go for a bit of plank chat, if that's okay, because the plank at the bottom of the car wore past 1 millimetre, so they were automatically disqualified, and that has been claimed to because of the excessive running on the curbs in Austin has worn it down. Normally, when you have 3 practice sessions, you'd be able to monitor that a lot better. So now, into the next sprint, the final sprint of the year, where you do want to push the curves here quite as much as you can, we only have 1 practice session, there could be a risk of the same thing happening again.
Okay, so just 2 things to clarify here. It wasn't the plank, it was the skid blocks in the plank that were worn too much, and it wasn't over the curbs, it was over the bumps.
But surely going over curbs doesn't help that.
It was the bumps in Austin. Austin's incredibly bumpy, as Alice will be able to verify.
Yeah.
And that's what caused them the problem. They set the ride height too low, both those teams. It was because of the first practice session and only the practice session to set the cars. But and that's not to say Brazil's also got bumps on it. Not as many as Austin. There's something about the Austin track surface. I think I spoke to Bobby Epstein, actually, the circuit boss there, over the course of the Austin weekend, and asked him about the bumps. And he was saying what happened was that, I was going to say if you remember, but you won't remember because you weren't there. But in 2015, there was a hurricane basically affected Austin, the US Grand Prix. It was very wet, very windy, and there's so much water that a lot of the earth around the sort of works underground, like pipes and so on and drains, was washed away, so the ground sort of settled unevenly, and it sounds like they haven't properly resolved that issue yet, and obviously you can't really blame them, because to do it they have to dig up the whole track effectively. So I don't know how they're going to fix that. But so the bumps in Brazil are there, but they're not anywhere near as bad as Austin, and that's why they're so bad in Austin.
Austin, I remember having driven around sort of street circuits. Okay, now Miami's quite new, but even Singapore, that first section in Austin, I would say is as bumpy, if not bumpier, than parts of Singapore. It's so bumpy. And actually, when you've got a car on edge with the rear and you haven't quite got the rear through that first section of track, it's horrible. But yeah, they I think the MotoGP riders complained about it, didn't they? And I thought that they were going to do so. Maybe they did do something about it.
They did do a bit of resurfacing, I think, pre the MotoGP racing there, but it wasn't enough.
No, I mean, speaking to drivers that were there before and have been there after, they said it doesn't feel that much different.
44 minutes and 4 seconds remain of free practice one. Verstappen, Perez and Hamilton are the top three. Verstappen fastest with a 1:13.1. He's currently in the pits and actually out of his car having a chat with his engineers. Hülkenberg is up in fourth, of course, the 2010 pole sitter here for Williams. Russell, Sainz, Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Alonso the top 10. Ocon, Stroll, Bottas, Ricciardo, Gasly the top 15. Sargent, Tsunoda, Albon, Zhou and Magnussen the top 20 as Russell comes across the line to go third fastest. As Fernando Alonso, Alice, starts a lap, heads downhill through the centre S's. Do you fancy guiding us around with Fernando Alonso?
Yeah, and sorry, Benny's about. I thought Benny was about to come in there, but he's heading down now into turn 4, and this is the first of the DRS zones as he swoops through the famous corner. And every time I see someone go through this section, it just reminds me of that great battle we had in 2021 of Lewis and Max. He pushed me off. No, he didn't. I just noticed there's a new piece of tarmac as well there going through the section of 6, 7, and then down to 8. And this is what I like about this track is it's people say, well, it's just a basic sort of circuit, you know, we've got some medium speed corners, we've got a few high speed, but it's actually really, really technical. And there's a lot of combined turning and braking, and that is tricky when you have to go out and get the tyres up to temperature and you've got that push lap, and trying to load that front tyre up whilst using the brake is a really tough thing to do. It's something that you learn very early on racing in single seaters, but it's a tricky thing to do. And when you've got a combination of that and the tyre wear and making sure the tyres, like for example in qualifying, are up to temperature, that could be really, really difficult as Alonso now closes the lap, goes into turn 1 and he's in P6.
So just on Alonso, by the way, one of the things he was talking about in the press conference yesterday, apart from these wild rumours about him moving to Red Bull, was their slump in form, Aston Martin, in the sort of most recent part of the season. And I'm interested to see how they get on this weekend, because the point he was making was that they've been doing a lot of experiments the last 2 races. They've had a new floor, which they introduced in Austin, which they took off both cars actually for that race, and then they took it off one of the cars ahead of the race in Mexico. So the implication of that was that here's Sargent's radio.
Something's wrong with my visor.
Copy. Logan Sargent at Williams has got something wrong with his visor. The implication was that the new floor had, not worked basically, as many of the upgrades that they seem to have introduced this year seem not to have worked. Alonso wouldn't talk about which floor they would have on the car. He just said the best one. But the point he was going to make was the overarching point he was making was that they can't afford to experiment this race because there's only one practice session before qualifying, so they have to commit to a setup and just go for it, and it's got to be the best setup. They can't afford to spend 3 sessions he didn't say faffing about, but that's effectively what he was trying to get at, I think. So it's going to be interesting. Here's Alonso's radio.
Fernando, possible punch on the rear left, stand by. Yeah, Fernando, we've got a puncher. Fernando, box, and run switch to puncher. Run switch to puncher.
Screw.
Could be, couldn't it? Yeah.
A puncture then on the rear left for Fernando Alonso, who comes to a slow and teeters into the pit lane.
So the point he said was, look, I qualified 4th in Qatar, which is only 3 races ago. So maybe it's not quite as bad as it looks, was what he was saying. So that's why I'm interested to see how they actually get on this weekend.
People have short memories, don't they, in Formula One? What a start to the season it was for Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin, but especially when you do a direct comparison with McLaren, and Formula One is a development race. McLaren's rate of form has been a steep rise, and Aston Martin are the complete polar opposite. They've fallen behind McLaren now in the constructors' standing. So Aston Martin now 5th, McLaren up into 4th, 20 points separating them as Fernando Alonso makes it back to his garage and gets wheeled in by his mechanics, who will take a look at that rear left. So quite a few cars in the pits at the moment. Hamilton, Leclerc still out there, so is Albon, Stroll, Bottas also out there too. This is the sound of Oscar Piastri slowing down, coming into the pit lane, locking up his front wheels, because it's an interesting pit lane entry in Interlagos, because it comes in on the left-hand side of turn 15, the final corner, slightly banked, and you approach it at a rate of knots.
You approach it at a rate of knots, but that is added to the twist, or the S's that there is coming in at that short space of time. So again, that's the nature of this track. I was saying about combined loading. The drivers are trying to turn to not go into the barrier, come into the pit lane, and they've got to slam on the brakes to make sure that they don't go over the speed limit line, basically, over a certain speed. Of course, it's taken sort of a bit of an average going down the pit lane, but you still need to make sure you're down to that speed limit by the time you sort of cross that line and go into the pit lane. So it's tricky, because once you've lost that downforce and you slam on the brakes and turn, you're going to lock up the front tyre, and that adds to the trickiness of the track. But Oscar's made it in. Okay, a bit of a lock-up close to the barrier, but he's safely through, and the sound you can hear now is Lewis Hamilton. All drivers at the moment, Harry, are sticking to the soft tyre, and of course this is the only practice session we're going to get of the weekend.
It certainly is, before qualifying gets going for the Grand Prix later on. You can hear that on 5 Sports Extra from 5:55, and that will set the grid for the Grand Prix. And then Saturday becomes its own sprint day, but it's the last one we'll have as Lewis Hamilton comes around the final corner onto the main straight. Not even really a corner, but it technically counts as one across the line. Stays in 4th. Tsunoda's finding some pace though, and he goes fastest. He's on the medium compound of tyre, is Yuki Tsunoda, with a 1:12.8. The Japanese driver gets a cheer from the crowd as he comes across the line. It is the last sprint of the year. Happy about that? Sad?
Now you've said it, I kind of feel a little bit sad.
Do you know what was interesting in Austin, Alice? I'm sure you'll remember this. Was that since the sprint was introduced, people there've been split opinions on it. Max Verstappen's never been shy about saying he doesn't like it. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc say they quite like it every now and again. They wouldn't want it every weekend. A lot of the drivers are in that camp, by the way. But in the paddock within Formula One, there was a real sense that it just wasn't working. This current format. A lot of people were saying the Saturday just felt like it didn't matter. It had no consequences. Why are we watching this? Okay, there's a few points. Maybe people will feel, obviously the championship's over, maybe people will be feeling differently about it if 8 points versus 7 points between Hamilton and Verstappen, for example, in 2021 would have definitely been important. And so maybe that was the context in which these views were being expressed, but they were really being expressed. Lots of people, Christian Horner particularly, was saying, he was one of them, look, something's not working, we need to have another look. We need to have another look at it, see if we can work out how to make it better. And one of the things that drove this, I think, potentially, was Bobby Epstein, the guy I was mentioning before, the Austin circuit boss. He did an interview leading up to the weekend where because obviously they went for the sprint, you have to pay more money to have the sprint. And he was like, do you know what, I don't think we'll do this again, because we've got less people here on Saturday this year than we had on Saturday last year. And we're paying $5 or $6 million more for it. So yeah, you can mix it up again next year if you want Formula One, was kind of his message. So I think the bosses will go into this winter looking at ways to spice it up a bit. One of the ideas that's been suggested is reverse grids for the sprint. One idea, or maybe a reverse top 10. One of the ideas that's been suggested is single shot qualifying. I'm not sure why that would make a difference to the sprint. More points people have thrown out there, although I think that raises another question about the impact of the sprint on the wider Grand Prix weekend and taking away from it. I think there'll be some changes this winter into the format of the sprint.
The way I see it, and as Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo locks up heading into down the downhill, Senna S is on his lap, the front left locking up, running a little bit wide. The way I see it, and I mentioned this in the Checkered Flag podcast previewing the weekend, which you can download from the BBC Sounds app and wherever you get your podcasts, and Jolyon shot me down on that shock. But the sprints were introduced for entertainment purposes, mainly. And so I think you've got to go full in that. I'm with Carlos Sainz, who I believe was the first person who kind of touted this idea of reverse grids, but reversing them via championship order. So Verstappen would start 20th, Perez 19th, Hamilton 18th, and then you would have Logan Sargent and Kevin Magnussen on the front row. You'd still have points down for the top 8, but those points would go towards a separate sprint standings. So then there's no big world title being decided in a sprint race. It's fun, it's entertainment, it gives the entire grid something to push for, and if Verstappen is starting at the back around similarly competitive cars, it's not going to be a simple cut through the pack and he'll take the lead by lap 10 of a sprint. So that's my view on it. And then it's a bit more, FA Cup-y or whatever, where it doesn't quite have a meaning in terms of are you going to get promoted in your league or not, but it has wider ramifications and it's entertainment, right?
Yeah. No, I like reverse grid races. We see them a lot I keep mentioning junior categories, but at the end of the day, this is where a lot of the future stars will be coming from. And they do it in F2, they do it in F3. Okay, it's based on qualifying result and it's not full reverse grid. But I'm up for that. I mean, as Benny said,
great. We'll leave it there then. Sorted, done. FIA.
Change it. I don't mind seeing a sprint rate because it's different. Would we be sat here sort of saying, no, they're a bit dull? If we had, for example, a year like Andrew said, with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, and where all these points count, where the sprint actually is really, really important to them. But yeah, we'd be here saying, no, actually, we don't mind them. I definitely don't mind them, not all the time, like Hamilton and co. But yeah, I'm up for seeing a reverse grid race because it adds in something different. And unfortunately, at the moment, how many exciting Grand Prix can you count? Probably only on one hand, that we've seen this year where we've gone, wow, wasn't that really exciting? We've had good Grand Prix, don't get me wrong, but if it adds some overtaking and something else and a challenge. And as a driver, I'd be quite up for. I mean, W Series did a full reverse grid race based on championship points once, and I absolutely loved it. The different challenge of coming through. Okay, I wasn't driving a Formula One car, and it didn't count for any points. It was a non-championship race, but it was really enjoyable. And as you're a racing driver, you want to be racing wheel to wheel with somebody. You want to try and get as far as you can up the front of the field, and it was exciting.
Lewis Hamilton said in the build-up this weekend the most fun he's ever had in a sprint was when he started at the back here in Sao Paulo in 2021 and carved his way through the field.
Well, look, the sprint in 2021 in Sao Paulo was the perfect example of how a sprint weekend can really build into something incredibly dramatic. If that weekend hadn't been a sprint, that drive, which some people would say was the greatest of Hamilton's entire career, from the back of the grid in the sprint up to 5th, then a 5-place grid penalty back to 10th, and then 10th to the win, 25 places he made up to win, that would never have happened. I mean, maybe he would have won the Grand Prix from the back of the grid. I doubt it, but the thing was, that again was a different, the irony is that was a different sprint format. That was the first one where the sprint result defined the grid for the Grand Prix. And they took it away from that the following year because they didn't think that was right. And I think lots of people agreed with that principle because, there's a feeling that the Grand Prix is sacrosanct. It's called a Grand Prix for a reason. They're important. Each individual Grand Prix matters. It's not just about where it is in the World Championship. The fact that someone has 50 Grand Prix victories or 30 Grand Prix victories is important regardless of how many World Championships they've won. A Grand Prix win is a big deal. and a sprint win isn't. And you don't want to take away from the Grand Prix for the sake of the sprint, and that's the tricky balancing act that Formula 1 has to go through when it makes these decisions. What's interesting is I think Formula 1 are feeling a bit defensive about all this, because yesterday they sent round a load of data saying just
why the sprints are so good.
It proves why the sprints are increasing the audience. So I've got it in front of my laptop in front of me now. I won't read it all out, but basically they're saying that the data does show or suggest that lies and statistics and all that, but it does suggest that the audiences are bigger on TV when there's a sprint weekend.
Well, let us know what you think. Hashtag BBC F1. And this will be the last time this year we'll talk about it, because there's no more sprints after this. There's only a few races left to go. Who knows what 2024 will bring in terms of sprint. But F1 is if spelt backwards. So who knows? What if we had a different qualifying format? Who knows?
Oh, wow, you're so
Producer
clever.
Joe gave me such a dirty look there as well.
So did I was like, and then I looked at Joe and we were like, oh.
Yeah, all right, fine. We'll move on. 29 minutes and 16 seconds remaining. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz in his Ferrari, making his way uphill through 14. The pit lane entry to your left, slightly back. Seen a lot of cars bumping. We're going over the bumps there, and the skid blocks feeling the effect as the sparks fly, but he comes across the line. Seeing a few more cars come out onto the medium compound of tyre. Russell a few moments ago went fastest on that medium with a 1:11.8. Alonso is currently in second. He is a 1:12.6 on the hard compound tyre. Verstappen, Tsunoda fourth, Perez fifth, Hamilton, Norris, Leclerc, Hülkenberg and Sainz the top 10, Piastri, Stroll, Albon, Ocon, Bottas the top 15, Ricciardo, Gasly, Sargent, Joe and Magnussen the top 20. And of course, Kevin Magnussen is just gearing up for a fast lap. Rewind 12 months ago for Kevin Magnussen, and what a day that was for the Dane and for Haas to achieve pole position. Of course, it was in a different format with the way the sprint race worked. He was the fastest at the end of Q3 in qualifying, helped, of course, by the weather. And it's still a little bit grey, overcast. Rain is predicted to come sometime between now and qualifying, but Magnussen gears up for a lap and heads downhill through the Senate S's in his Haas, which has been, let's face it, struggling. They introduced a big new update, a new car concept in Austin. It didn't exactly transform the car day and night, and Mexico saw Kevin Magnussen have a huge shunt into the wall with a left rear suspension failure. The team have said they haven't had to replace the chassis for Kevin Magnussen, just a few repairs needed as he makes his way around the fast right-handers of 6 and 7 and into the braking zone off camber into the right-hander of turn 8. That battle though, I know it might sound like I'm clutching at straws here, but the battle for 7th in the constructors.
Oh, come on!
I know,
you're giving me the battle for 7th in the constructors.
No, let me get there.
Points make prizes.
Exactly.
No?
Yeah, we're talking tens of millions.
That's what you
here.
encourage to children.
Are talking about $10 million for each step in a constructors championship.
Would you take that money?
I very much would. Thank you, Alex. Yes, we got it.
Yeah,
are you offering?
Talk to her after.
Split it.
But look, my point is, because there's Magnussen, he's on the soft tyre, by the way, he's just put in a third fastest time. Because that is a really big deal for those teams at the back. Williams, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo and Haas. And off the back of Mexico, Daniel Ricciardo, what an astonishing drive, managing to out-qualify Sergio Perez and then putting in a fantastic race to get 7th. But what could have been for Yuki Tsunoda, I wonder, in that race as well? And as I'm keen to talk to you on this, because you deal with a lot of young drivers as well, and Tsunoda's had a few years now in Formula 1, is quite notorious for being quite flippant and agitated on the radio, but he was having a brilliant drive. I'd liken it to Norris's comeback in that race as well. He could have caught Daniel Ricciardo and perhaps overtaken him, as there's a bit of contact between Norris and Hülkenberg as they make their way into the left-hander at 12, wheel-to-wheel contact. I think it was a bit of a miscommunication as to who was letting who through, but they got away with it, no damage. Norris still continuing, but lucky that was wheel-to-wheel there as they drifted into each other, coming into the left-hander uphill, which builds you up to the end of the lap. So both are still going. But back to my point, Tsunoda, and then he threw it all away, bumping into Piastri, and he was angry on the radio,
Perez,
and it was a bit like the Tsunoda of old, I want to say, coming back in, because I thought he'd made a bit of a turn this year.
Yeah, I mean,
in terms of maturity,
it's difficult when the visor's down. And no one will really ever sort of understand. And people say, why is Max getting so agitated? He's leading the race. You know, Austin, for example, when he had that brake issue, and he wasn't miles in the lead, and Lewis was charging him down. But once that visor, that helmet is on, as we are now just getting to see a replay of coming into. That is really bizarre, because it looks like Lando sort of overshoots the corner. Hülkenberg is on the racing line, in all fairness.
And he's looking left in his mirror.
Yeah, so I think Lando has given him a bit of a shoulder here to say, mate, you're on the racing line.
Well, that's a risky
bit of a push
shoulder
on that is a very risky shoulder. That's what's happened, because he doesn't lock up, and it doesn't look like he struggled to slow down. He would probably say, I struggled to slow down. But that looks like, to me, one of those little sort of, you've better watch out, mate. You've just ruined my lap there. But we'll see what comes about of that. But back to Yuki. Once that helmet is on and the visor's down, you've got the adrenaline going through. It doesn't matter how experienced you are and how many races you've done. Sometimes when you think you're sort of doing okay and your emotions are under control, you can just sort of lose it a little bit, and tensions are so high. And Yuki, people say, well, he's not really under pressure, is he? But he is. Every single driver on this grid, in some way, shape or form, feels some kind of pressure. For Max, Austin, where he started to get agitated on the radio, he wants to get the win. If you look at Perez, for what happened at Mexico, he's under pressure for his seat. Tsunoda, he's in some way is you could say is under pressure in the future for a seat, especially seeing how well that Liam Lawson has done. So he obviously wanted to get a really good result, and that sort of fell away from him. So it's difficult, and it's quite easy for us to sit here and say, well, the drivers should just keep calm, they're professional athletes, But once you've got all that adrenaline going through you, it's difficult to do, to keep it under control. But there are different ways that you can learn to do it, and I've been there plenty of times where I've thought, yeah, you're under control, and then someone does something to annoy you, and you just get all these rush of emotions from somewhere. And it is hard to teach any driver, because at the end of the day, these are competitive athletes, and they want to be winning races, and they want to be in Formula One and make sure that they've got their seats.
They certainly do, and I think in all of the talk around Perez, that Red Bull seat, Tsunoda's name was not mentioned once. It was always Lawson or Ricciardo or Perez himself or Alonso or somebody else. So he's got a contract for next year, and he's currently 6th fastest. So let's see what AlphaTauri can do. But courtesy of Daniel Ricciardo's result last time around, they rocketed up to 8th in the Constructors. So they were plumb last. Rocketed, Andrew.
You're really selling this, aren't you?
I feel like that's my job.
No, your job's to commentate on what's going on.
Well, it's practice, though. There is only one practice.
Formula One now, mate. This is the BBC.
Well, look, 21 minutes then, just over that left of this session. I've tried to big up the back marker fight as much as I can. Russell is still fast. We're seeing some soft tyre running now. Hulkenberg and Magnussen were on the soft tyres. They went up into 2nd and 4th. And still, though, a lot out there on the hard compounder tyre. Zhou's out there on the medium. He's coming around, approaching Jung Sao. He's currently 20th and last. The second best team right now, I think is fair to say, is McLaren. But how do we expect them to perform around here? Because I feel like they're going
to get some stats.
I know he's given me a thing. He's given me the look.
Set him up now. Well,
I look forward to hearing them. But so for my 2 pence, for what it's worth, where are they at the moment? Norris is down in 12th and Piastri is 15th, but they've only done hard compound tyre running. Their Achilles heel, I suppose, in the last couple of years has been their low speed corners, never being quite able to carry as much speed as they need to through them. This track has a couple, but it's a bit of an all-rounder, and I think they've proven really with the development they're taking that actually the McLaren is pretty good now at any kind of track. You can't rule them out. So that's why I would put them in a close second. Mercedes again are looking strong as well. since the new floor coming in Austin, and Hamilton had a brilliant drive in Mexico. So I think there's a nice fight there developing for that second place. And what an upturn in performance from McLaren as well.
Look, if there was an award for Manager of the Year in Formula One, Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, would get it without question. I think for how apparently he's transformed that team from the doldrums at the start of the year to where they are now. Are they the second best team at the moment? I think it's really, really hard to tell between them and Mercedes. So the numbers I was looking at were qualifying. So the second half of the season, so basically since McLaren introduced their upgraded car, in terms of pace compared to Red Bull in qualifying, Ferrari are actually second fastest, and they're only a couple of hundredths behind Red Bull on average. And McLaren and Mercedes, McLaren are ahead of Mercedes on qualifying pace, but only by 0.004 of a second. Now, in the races, it's a different picture. I would argue that probably on balance, Mercedes is still just about the second strongest team. Probably partly because Hamilton is delivering more consistently than Norris. Norris is making errors in qualifying. That's affecting his race results. So it's hard to tell, for example, whether in Mexico was the McLaren or the Mercedes the faster car. Norris did an absolutely unbelievably good drive, which Andrea Stella likened to Fernando Alonso's drive in Valencia in 2012, which was definitely Alonso's best ever drive, which makes it one of the best drives in history. And he was with Alonso as race engineer at the time, so you've got to take him at his word. Brilliant drive to finish 5th from 19th on the grid. Also, he dropped to 14th at the restart halfway through the race. But would he have beaten Hamilton if they'd both started at the front? We don't know. Same in Austin. Hamilton finished ahead, but he got disqualified. You know, how much of a difference did that make to the performance of the car? And all the way through this second half of the season, it's been really close between Mercedes and McLaren, to the extent that it's really hard to judge, I think. Clearly Ferrari are the 4th quickest team in terms of race pace, usually, but not always, because even sometimes they're the 2nd quickest car. If only the World Championship didn't include Red Bull, I think is the headline from that little episode I've just outlined.
We're getting a little drag race down towards turn 1. Tsunoda with DRS and a bit of slipstream off the back of Sergio Perez. Red Bull. Tsunoda moves to the inside and gets the move done on Perez. So Tsunoda feeling feisty in practice with 18 minutes remaining. This is the sound of Hulkenberg up through the gears, through Zhang the left-hand kink of 13, and then the DRS line comes and he decides to back off and head into the pit lane. The two Hasses on their soft compound of tyre, currently 2nd and 3rd. George Russell is fastest, ahead of Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Alonso, then 4th, Verstappen 5th, Tsunoda, Perez, Gasly, Ocon, Hamilton the top 10, Joe, Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, Piastri the top 15, Stroll, Albon, Bottas, Ricciardo and Logan Sargent 20th and last. And another bit of news, there's no Brazilian driver on the grid right now, which is a huge shame. There is a reserve driver, Felipe Drogovic, who is a reserve driver for Aston Martin. He was confirmed as staying with the team as a reserve driver for next season, which isn't an insignificant announcement, because he was one of the names thrown into the ring that could potentially replace Logan Sargent at Williams. So is that, Alice, a bit of an indicator? Do you think that Sargent is going to be given another year at Williams?
I mean, I feel like he's probably going to be given another year. They're quite a supportive team, aren't they, Williams? They're not as cutthroat as Red Bull. Maybe a part of that is because of the finances that come along with certain drivers. Latifi sort of springs to mind a little bit there, as we just actually see Logan Sargent have a twitch of oversteer, make a mistake and go off straight on into turn 2, cuts across the runoff and brings it back on, so that will screw his lap that he was about to start. But I expect that we will probably see Logan there, and he'll get one more final shot of it next year, unless Andrew has heard any other rumours.
I don't know what's going to happen at Williams, other than that James Vowles his Sargent's radio.
What just happened?
I don't know.
The front was completely off the ground.
Copy. I'll have a look.
That's him complaining about the fact that he went straight on at the first corner and he doesn't think it was a mistake that he made. Anyway, James Vowles, the Williams team principal, told me that they're going to wait till the end of the year. to decide. I mean, I think if you look at the stats, it's very bleak reading for Sargent. He's been out-qualified 24-0 by Alex Albon at an average of a second a lap. That is shocking. Shockingly bad for Formula One. You know, no one should be that much slower than their teammate in qualifying. I mean, even Lance Stroll's not that much slower than Fernando Alonso. You know, and that's Fernando Alonso. It begs the question why. I think Alice is right. The impression is they're looking for a reason to keep him. What I don't understand is why. Because do they really think that the list of options that they've got is so poor? You know, I don't know. They must do. But you know, what about the people who are leading Formula 2 this year, for example? A lot of them are tied into other teams. Frederick Vesti's tied into Mercedes, for example. Teo Pourchaire is tied into Sauber.
Is it to show, from Williams' perspective, you know, some faith in their own driver program? Because Sargent joined the Williams program a couple of years ago. Then their next drivers on the list are only just stepping up to Formula 2, so they're not ready. I
can't answer your question because you know, it doesn't, on the face of it doesn't make sense. No, Sargent was defending himself yesterday, saying my race pace has been good in the last 2 races, and it has. But you know, they're at the back of the grid. So Albon's qualifying 16th and Logan Sargent's qualifying 20th, excuse me. You know, it probably doesn't make much difference if you're a second behind, because there's only a couple of cars between you. But if Williams were his Sargent's radio again,
something's wrong with the front left, man.
yeah, he's obviously feels he's got some kind of problem with the wheel lifting up through slow corners. You know, but if your car's quick enough to qualify 5th, for example, with the lead driver, and the second driver's a second behind, he's going to be 16th. You know, in Formula 1 at the moment, it's that close in the midfield. So it's going to be, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what James Vowles is going to decide. Obviously, Sargent must bring some money. I don't know how much.
The nationality as well, the passport?
Partially the nationality, but again, if you're at the back, it's not selling too many sponsors to you, is it? I think they don't really want to get tied in with Red Bull and try and take Liam Lawson. I would say about Felipe Drugovich, just because he's signed as Aston Martin's reserve driver doesn't mean he can't necessarily be a Williams race driver. Mick Schumacher is definitely out. They're not interested in him. So Sargent can save his drive, but as Alice says, I mean, he's got to up his game. There's no question about that.
I know that the team he raced with in Formula 2 and people are sort of around him, okay, not his immediate around him, but it helped him in that championship, wanted him to do another season of Formula 2. They felt that he still had learning to do, which is never a bad thing. Some people can take that as an offence and say, what, you don't think I'm good enough for F1? No, it's not what the case is. It's just he had more to learn. He had more to do. He only competed in 1 season of F2. Okay, other drivers have only competed in 1 season F2 or GP2 and jumped up straight away and been absolutely fine. Max didn't even do that championship. And yeah, look at him and look how his first season F1 went. But some drivers, it just takes a little bit longer, and I think a lot of drivers feel that because here's Sargent again.
I'm driving around with 2 wheels, man. The fronts are off the ground. Everywhere.
We're checking. Yeah, so back off. We've seen the issue.
He's not wrong. Every time when he does turn in, that front right is off the ground completely. It's not even touching, while the left is firmly planted and the right rear, the right rear also, I think, touching the ground, but that doesn't look right to me.
No, it doesn't. So he has got some kind of issue there. But I was going back to drivers jumping up quite quickly into the high categories. A lot of that, I think, stems from Max Verstappen. A lot of drivers think, okay, well, Max did it. You know, his career path was very, very quick. But what people don't quite understand is the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. You know, drivers are able to do a lot of testing in F1 cars. Last year's F1 car, for example, Drugovich, he's out testing in Aston Martin's 2022 car, 2021 car, whichever car it is, but current Formula 1 car. Same with Jehan Daruvula, who's racing in F2 at the moment. There are plenty of drivers sort of around that are doing that. And if they've got the finances, let's hear from Verstappen.
Okay, just be aware, Max, it is quite gusty out there. Variable lap to lap.
Yeah, it's quite hard to be consistent.
Understood.
Then, you know, some drivers learn at different rates and they will just have to take their time and move up. But people still feel pressured, and maybe Sargent thought, well, now's my chance. You know, I've had race wins in F2. I can move up into Formula One, but doesn't always happen, you know. Unfortunately, and you take a little bit longer to get used to the car and to learn to racing at these sort of levels. And it's still a big jump. And actually, sorry, he did actually do seven rounds of the 7 races in the 2021 season. So he did have, but we have seen drivers, and Jolien probably won't mind me saying he's one of them that had probably more than 2 seasons, definitely more than 2 sort of seasons at that kind of level, and still went on to have, you know, some fairly good results at some points throughout Formula One. So it's each driver's different, and basically what I'm saying is not everyone is going to be like Max Verstappen and rush up through the categories. Same with Charles Leclerc, same with Oscar Piastri. Look how he dominated and went through. And what people forget is actually he did a lot of testing with Alpine last year around various tracks around the world, various Grand Prix tracks. And he's stepped in and he's done a good job, but it's not like he's just jumping in an F1 car for the first time.
No, very well said. But Sargent then, with those issues, has come into the pits. But we've had a bit of soft running and medium running out there. Russell still fastest with a 1:11.8, but Piastri was out there on the softs and was going faster in all 3 sectors, and then, well, the first 2 sectors, and then came into the pits. Hulkenberg is second. Albon has gone up to third on the soft compound tyre. Stroll up in fourth on the mediums. Magnussen fifth on the softs. Would make that Gasly in fifth on a set of mediums in his Alpine. Then comes Magnussen, Alonso, Hamilton, Verstappen, Tsunoda, the top 10. Perez, Bottas, Ocon, who has just started the lap now on the medium compound of tyre. Then comes Joe. Norris is in the pits in 15th in front of Leclerc. Also in the pits, Sainz in the pits, Piastri in the pits. Then comes Ricciardo and Sargent, 19th and 20th. We haven't seen much from Ricciardo yet. I know he's only done some hard compound tyre running, but you know, rewind to Mexico and he was lighting up the timing screens for the majority of the weekend. His teammate Tsunoda, who has been out there on the medium compound tyre, is up there in 10th, but Ricciardo is now out there on the medium and has set a personal best sector 1. So we'll wait and see where he comes through. Ocon also on a personal best in sector 1 as well. It is tough, this sprint format. Just one practice session before you are thrown into it. The drivers do seem to like the fact that it is like that. There's less endless testing, it seems, over 3 practice sessions across 2 days. You are straight thrown into the thick of it as Ocon comes across the line to go 9th fastest. Ricciardo making his way round the final corner. Now this is the sound of the Australian up through the gears, across the line, and it's a 1:12.7 for Daniel Ricciardo on the mediums into 9th. How much would last weekend have done for his confidence? Sky high, surely.
Yeah, loads. He's a very experienced driver, but people thrive off confidence, don't they, to get good results. He was absolutely buzzing, and to be fair, he did a very good job. You know, he held his own out there after being out for a long time.
Lost power, went over the curb for it.
Okay, checking. We're checking everything now.
Rest of it is no good.
That's Nico Hulkenberg on the radio saying he lost power going over the curbs at turn 4. He's made it back to the pits and is now being wheeled into his garage. Also worth noting that bit of contact between Hulkenberg and Norris earlier on in the session is being investigated after the session. So Norris could be in for a little bit of trouble there.
Do you know what? I think he will be, because it did look like he was sort of saying, as I've already mentioned, you know, you're on the racing line, mate. Just going to give you a little bit of a shove to make sure that you don't do that to me again. So we may see a penalty coming Lando Norris's way, which will obviously not be a great thing for his weekend. But back to Daniel Ricciardo, yeah, his confidence is going to be sky high. He's sitting there in 9th place at the moment, just dropped down to 10th as Mind you, Zhou has jumped up into P6, albeit on the soft tyre, but he's 10th is Daniel Ricciardo, 9 tenths off Russell on the same compound medium tyre, as Sonoda is, well, pretty much near enough matched him, but down in 13th place.
Yeah, good lap from Zhou to get up into 6th. This is the sound of Nico Hulkenberg. Let's see if we can hear the cutting out. So he comes through the left-hander of turn 4, runs out over the curves, and then it just sounds like it's stuck in gear almost.
Yeah, it's lost some kind of power. But actually the replays we've been getting, it's actually these curbs look pretty violent. You seeing a lot of, we've seen some replays of some of the cars kicking up a little bit of dust and material from the curbs. So interesting to see what has come back with, but it's obviously dislodged something, whether it be underneath a seat or some kind of wiring that is dislodged there. But now we have, say, the big guns. I guess we can include Carlos Sainz as a big gun, I would say so, coming out now on the soft tyre. So I'm expecting this top 10 order, Harry, to change ever so slightly. But saying that, Carlos Sainz is down already on George Russell's first sector, and Russell was on the medium tyre and Carlos is on the soft.
Yeah, 9 thousandths slower than Russell was, but Sainz out there. Leclerc has either made a mistake in sector 1 or is not quite on a push lap because he is miles off the pace. If you are joining late, we've only got a few minutes left. We were talking about Hulkenberg and Norris having a bit of contact earlier on in the session. That is under investigation. Well, it will be under investigation after the session. That was after the two bumped wheels coming into the left-hander at turn 12. John Sao, Hulkenberg on the racing line, Norris running down the inside, and then contact between Norris's right rear and Hulkenberg's front left as Norris ran quite deep into the corner, but didn't look too much like he'd made a mistake. So we'll see what the outcome of that is as Carlos Sainz comes across the line in his Ferrari on that soft compounded tyre and goes fastest. So he's found just over a tenth in front of George Russell, who's on the mediums, a 1:11.7 from Sainz, who now comes to a slope. We'll see what Leclerc has got next time around when he gets on it for well, maybe at one more lap in. 3 minutes and 19 seconds remaining of practice 1. So Leclerc currently down in 19th. A lot of the big hitters, the two McLarens down there as well. Norris in the pits. Piastri is out on track as Charles Leclerc runs down through the gears into the centre S's, downhill, and embarks on a fast lap on these soft compounder tyres.
Yeah, it looks pretty smooth, pretty easy there in that first section as he bleeds out now of sector 2. DRS wide open. He's actually over a tenth down on his teammate Carlos Sainz. Coming through into sector 2 now, heading up the hill, which is, I've heard, pretty steep. Camera doesn't quite do it justice, and then we're coming into that section where you've got the combined braking and steering, which is really tricky, and one of those that can play a big factor in terms of whether you get a big, nice, chunky flat spot on your tyre or not. But it's all looking fairly tidy for Charles Leclerc at the moment, who it's not really going to match his teammate too much. He's at 2.5 tenths down still on Carlos Sainz.
Let's see what Leclerc's got then in the closing stages of practice 1. Hits the DRS line, the rear wing flap slides open. He moves over to the inside, hugging the pit wall, crosses the line. Fastest of anybody in the final sector, but he goes second fastest overall, a 1:11.8, a tenth separating the two Ferraris in 1 and 2 with a minute and 43 still left on the clock. Russell is third, Hulkenberg and Albon the top 5. Logan Sargent and the Williams, they must have managed to fix whatever was going on with his wheels and tyres not touching the ground, or particularly the front right. He is now back out there on the softs and has gone 9th fastest. This is the sound of Valtteri Bottas coming across the line, getting a little bit of a tow from his teammate in front, Zhou Guanyu, who gets out of the way as he then dives into turn 1, but it all comes undone because he can't get the car turned in and has to bail out of it and cut across the runoff area. So Bottas will have to go again. He's out there on the medium compound of tyre at the moment. And this track it is bumpy. It is very undulating. There's a few banked corners here as well. There's more than meets the eye here at Interlagos.
Yeah, there is. As we're seeing some fans, Lewis, you are the best. Take a picture with me. Well, hopefully he'll see that for that. As we've got a battle now going down into turn 1. That is Yuki Tsunoda that really isn't giving way to Lewis Hamilton. And they are wheel to wheel with the DRS wide open. Is Lewis going to...
This is great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit early, guys, but I think Lewis was just trying to maximise getting a bit of a better track
Lewis
space
is backed
there.
out.
So Lewis is now saying he's backed out.
Well, his DRS didn't
not
open.
too much, yeah. So having a bit battles for track position already. Maybe that's a sign to come of what we've got for later on.
Well, I think Tsunoda's eyeing up that corner because he did the exact same move on Perez earlier on in the practice. He got the toe he was behind in the slipstream of the car in front with the DRS, slid down the inside on Perez earlier, does the exact same thing to Hamilton as Tsunoda then gets in front of him to go on a lap. Tsunoda out there on the medium compound of tyre, but that's time's down to 0. Checkered flag is out. We'll wait and see if anybody can beat Carlos Sainz, but nobody is lighting up the timing screens, and Logan Sargent is coming in hot into Junção, finds Sainz in his Ferrari in front, just about manages to thread the needle and get through. Joe is the first man to take the checkered flag, but Carlos Sainz fastest at the end of free practice 1. It's a Ferrari 1-2. They waited to the very end to do it. We didn't see quite what they had. And where did Verstappen end up? He's not finding anything. He is out there on the hards, and he takes the checkered flag down in 16th. So I think this leaves a lot of question marks, doesn't it, for what's to come in qualifying a little later on. You can listen to that at 5:55 on 5 Sports Extra. But at the end of free practice 1 then, it is Carlos Sainz fastest by just over a tenth from his Ferrari teammate Charles Leclerc. George Russell is third, Hülkenberg and Albon the top 5. Stroll, Gasly, Joe, Sargent, Magnussen the top 10, Alonso, Hamilton, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Ocon the top 15. Verstappen is in 16th in front of Bottas. Perez is 18th, and the two McLarens of Norris and Piastri 19th and 20th. If that is a grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday, or even the sprint, Alice, we're in store for a good one.
We are, but Harry, I hate to break it to you, mate, I don't think that's what we're going to be seeing. Verstappen, he's out there on the hard tyre, same with Perez, Norris, Piastri. Looks a little bit bleak for them, and actually I'm surprised that McLaren didn't run the soft tyre. I know, especially for Piastri's sake, he went with what the team wanted him to do in Austin, but he felt that, you know, for a first proper qualifying session at that track, he needed to go on the soft tyre, and they've done the exact same thing here. They have not gone on the soft tyre, so Oscar struggling down there, but we've also got Albon, good job on the hard tyre, same with Stroll, Alonso in 11th, Hamilton in 12th on the hard tyre as well. So some opting to save some soft tyres, Ferrari not, as they're sitting up there on the soft tyre in P1 and P2.
Well, I wonder if some of those bigger hitters, we're just seeing a little replay of Logan Sargent as he was threading the needle behind Carlos Sainz coming into Junção to close off the lap, and it is a little bit on the racing line is Carlos Sainz. Sargent comes steaming in, has to dart to the inside last minute. I wonder if the stewards will have a little look at that, but it is only practice. But I wonder if the mixed up running, here's Gasly first.
What's Esteban doing?
Esteban has backed off.
Yeah, but I'm pushing. Guys, just useless.
Okay, mate, we'll discuss after the session.
Some miscommunication there between the two Alpine drivers. Pierre Gasly on the radio, who was on a fast lap coming through the fast right-hander of turn 6, 7, and then into the braking of turn 8. Comes across his teammate Esteban Ocon, who backed off massively, I think in an effort to try and let his teammate through, but caught him at the wrong moment.
He wasn't trying to let him through. He was sat there right on the apex. He certainly wasn't trying to let him through by the looks of that.
Well, that was what was going on with the two Alpines. But I wonder if the lack of the soft running perhaps for some of the bigger hitters is indicative of maybe the weather that we might see later on today for qualifying. Rain is likely. It's supposed to increase throughout the rest of the day. A couple of hours to go until qualifying. Could that be a factor?
Well, if you go by your BBC weather app.
Always.
Harry?
Always.
There we go. It's 70% chance of rain at 3 o'clock in Sao Paulo, which is just local time, of course, when qualifying will begin. So yeah, maybe it is down to a bit of the weather.
Well, we shall wait and see. Not long to go then until qualifying for the Grand Prix. Sunday's Grand Prix gets going, and you can listen to that in full on 5 Sports Extra from 5:55. But my thanks to the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, Alice Power alongside myself, Andrew Benson. I'm not Andrew Benson, I'm Harry Benjamin. That could be a change up, couldn't it? That is the end of free practice 1. Carlos Sainz is fastest in front of Charles Leclerc, but who will take pole for Sunday's Grand Prix? Join us later. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.